Alright, so today I want to talk about the 10 places where you can get rodents for your ball python or other pet snake. And it's probably one of the #1 questions that I've seen with a lot of new snake keepers. They'll buy the snake in the enclosure and the substrate and the heat mat, and they'll bring it all home and set it up, and then they'll start scratching their heads. Hey, where do I buy the rodents to feed my ball python or other pet snake? And I actually made a quick list of 10 different places where you can buy rodents for your ball python or other pet snake. And I'd say pretty much the #1 place that most people go is the pet store. You can actually go to a local pet store, like a big chain pet store, or you can go to some of your local reptile stores that specialize in reptiles. And I would say usually your reptile stores have a bigger selection as far as the sizes and the type of food versus some of your chain pet stores. Although I'd say the pet store is probably one of the most expensive places to get rats and mice to feed your snake. And the other thing is, even though it's the most expensive, I'd say it's probably the most convenient, especially if you live really close to a reptile store. And the other thing that's neat about a reptile store is you can actually walk in and start picking people's brains as far as, figuring out the right conditions to keep your snakes, especially if you're breeding them or if you run into problems, or if you're thinking about going to a reptile show. A lot of times you can start, asking around in the reptile stores as far as what you can expect going to like a reptile show or something like that. So there's pros and cons to each one. I'd say that's probably the most expensive. But #2, if you really want to get pretty much the cheapest rodents for your pet snake, you can actually buy from one of these online rodent supply stores. But the problem is on that is a lot of times you'll have to buy in bulk to really make it worthwhile. And pretty much I wrote down just 4 of the top ones that I could think of off the top of my head. The one that I really like is rodentpro.com. You can go to Rodent Pro, and they have rats and mice and quails and chickens and rabbits and a whole bunch of stuff like that for a whole bunch of different snakes, which is kind of interesting. Also, there's Perfect Prey, there's Big Cheese Rodents, there's American Rodent, and you kind of have to watch out on some of these. I actually went over to some of the reptile forums, and some people were listing all the different rodent supply places online, and I'd say probably half of them didn't exist anymore when I went over to check their websites. So it seems like these are the ones that are really big, that are still in business, that have been around for a really long time. And if you start shopping around as far as the prices between the different ones, a lot of times they change their prices based on the packaging. I've seen some where they'll actually vacuum pack some of their frozen rodents, and that makes the rodents last a lot longer, although a lot of times you'll actually pay a lot more. And the other thing I should mention too is if you're thinking about buying a lot of rodents, what you really want is a manual defrost freezer versus one that's like a frost-free freezer. The problem with the frost-free is they go through little cycles where they cool down, and then they warm up a little bit, just enough to melt the ice crystals inside of the freezer. They go through these heat and cold cycles, and it keeps the frost from building up in the freezer. But the problem is your food doesn't last as long. I've seen some people say with the frost-free freezer, your food only lasts, ideally about 3 to 6 months, where if you have a manual defrost, it can last for a year. Sometimes I've seen like 2 or 3 years on some of these manual defrosts. Some people claim that they can last a really long time. So I definitely look for a manual defrost freezer. And the other thing is, if you're thinking about buying in bulk and putting them in a freezer, I would probably avoid putting the rats and the mice in with your regular food. So when people go look for the pizza in the freezer, they don't have a whole bag of rats on top of the freezer. I actually started like that, and some of my family members were getting a little disturbed. So I actually bought a separate freezer just for my rodents to keep them completely separate from the rest of the food. Alright, so #3, you can buy rodents at a reptile show, especially if you find some frozen ones. At a reptile show, it's probably the most convenient and the best price, because essentially what it is, it's like some of these online rodent retailers, but they sell at the reptile shows where you're not paying for the shipping. And I'd say in most cases, you're probably paying right around $30 at least for the shipping, because they have to ship it in a box with dry ice. And in order to make that worthwhile, you have to buy a lot of rodents and you have to have a really good freezer to keep them around for a long time. So if you actually go to some of these reptile shows, they'll have pretty much the same thing there in little coolers set up around the show, and they'll have all the different sizes that you can pick from, and you can just buy one bag of rodents at a time versus trying to buy a whole big box where you have to, you know, buy a whole bunch of them at once. And a lot of times you can actually buy live rodents at the reptile shows, but I'd say in most cases your best bet is to buy the frozen ones for the best deal. All right, so number 4, you can actually buy one from a local rodent breeder. And for a while, I was actually selling to one person here in my local area. I was selling to a guy who bred some snakes. I kind of hooked up, and I was selling him all my extras. And for a while, I was selling to the reptile stores too. And that is kind of the ideal situation. And it was kind of interesting because a lot of times he would complain about the quality of the rodents from some of these big wholesalers that you'll actually see online when you're buying a whole big box at a time. I think a lot of times they don't have the best conditions in some of those places, and he said a lot of times the frozen rats would kind of smell like pee, which is kind of crazy. And he said all the rats and the mice that I sold him were the best that he's ever seen, because I don't really overpack my rats and my mice in my tubs. So that's another place you can actually, if you can find someone local, that would be ideal. So number 5, another place you can look is Craigslist. It seems like every time I go over to Craigslist in my local area, there's always someone that is offering either live or frozen rodents for sale for your snake. So that's another place you can actually go to look around for rodents. So number 6, I actually kind of heard this online. You can actually go to Facebook and search the classified ads. And I was on Facebook for a little bit, but it got a little bit overwhelming. There's just too many people contacting me over on Facebook. I finally closed down my account, so I can't even access Facebook. But a lot of people say it's a good place to go to find rodents over on Facebook. So number 7, you can find a ball python forum, and a lot of times you can actually find someone local on your reptile forum or other like Facebook or Craigslist or something like that, and you can go in with someone local and maybe split the shipping on some of these big boxes of rodents. If you can actually split the shipping like 3 or 4 ways, that would probably be the best way to do it if you could find some people close in your areas. And pretty much the best ball python forum that I've actually seen is called ballpythons.net, and I actually was over there. I think I posted like hundreds of comments over there before I started my YouTube channel. I don't really get over there that much. I was just kind of poking around over there to see, and a lot of people actually post, hey, I'm looking for some rodents in my local area. Do you know where I can get some? And that is a good place to find some local people. All right, so number 8, believe it or not, you probably won't believe this, you can actually get frozen rodents on Amazon.com. I actually went over there and did a search, and sure enough, they guarantee that the rodents will arrive frozen if you buy them over on Amazon. And some of these places, if you actually receive the rodents and it takes too long to ship them and they thaw out in transit, a lot of times they'll replace them because they have to stay frozen as far as long-term storage. So that's another thing to keep in mind as far as shipping them. And I don't think the regular guy can ship them without some permits, because you have to use dry ice to ship the rodents. I think there's regulations. I think you might need a license or some type of permit to ship rodents on dry ice. So number 9, here's another option. This is the option that I do. You can buy live rodents and breed your own. So I pretty much never buy any rodents from anybody. I breed all my own. And essentially what I do is I grow them up to a certain size, and then I euthanize them with CO2 and put them in the freezer. So I'm pretty much producing my own frozen thawed rodents. The problem is I'm not buying rodents, but now I'm buying rodent food and rodent bedding. That is pretty much my number 1. Because if you can figure out a place where you can buy some rodent food and get some bedding for, you know, almost nothing or free, you could do really good breeding your own rodents. So for example, if you actually worked in like, you know, where they had some, you know, expired food or something, or like right on the edge, like if you worked in a grocery store or something, you could use some of that food to supplement feeding your rodents or something like that. You can do pretty good. And if you could find some free bedding material, that would be ideal as far as keeping and breeding your own. The problem is the time that it takes to clean the rodents. I'd say you pretty much have to clean mice probably every 3 or 4 days maximum. Rats, you might be able to get away with 4 or 5 days between cleaning out the tubs, but let me tell you, it does take some time to handle your own rodents, growing them up for your own use. All right, so number 10, here's another place you can actually get some rodents. You can catch them in the wild. And this is one I would definitely not recommend. I've seen a lot of people saying, hey, I actually catch my own rats and mice for my snake. And it's kind of interesting. When I first moved up here in the mountains of Colorado, we had a mouse infestation. It was unbelievable. It was just completely out of control. I could actually look over in the forest and all the leaves on the ground of the forest would move because there were so many mice under the leaves. It was unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I got in my car one time and I actually had a Jeep. They got in my Jeep and they were all over the place. They were in my headliner. I could hear them scurrying around in my headliner. At one point, I was actually driving my Jeep down the highway in the rain. I had my windshield wipers turned down with my windshield wipers going back and forth, and this mouse crawled up on my windshield wiper on the highway driving in the rain. It was hanging out for dear life on my windshield wiper. There's just mice everywhere. And I finally got rid of them with mouse poison. I use these little poison baits. I actually got the idea from, I don't know if you've ever seen the videos over on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and look up the mouse plague in Australia. That is frightening. If you've ever seen videos of the mouse, it's like an explosion of mice that they had over there. And they would actually open up barn doors, and there were so many mice that would come out like water, just washing over the ground. So many mice. It just destroyed their crops and everything. And the way they finally got rid of it is they dropped mouse poison from airplanes and helicopters to get rid of the mice, which is kind of crazy. So that's pretty much it. That is my top 10 list if you're looking for some mice or rats to feed your pet snake. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.